6.5 years ago, I hired some people, some very smart people smarter than me. And we trained in predictive analytics. We started using the IBM software, SPSS modeler. And we made some amazing projects, actually, at that time for this country. Jose was one of the leaders, and the team just worked very, very hard to present to managers ideas of what they could do with the data that they already had in their organization, and started predicting things. What I found was that I had a bunch of young people, very smart young people, with laptops, with information about the future, with predictions about what was going to happen, market basket analysis, customer analytics, customer behavior predictions. And yet, the reaction that we often got from managers was like this: crossed arms, that's not going to happen. When we were doing IoT and we were predicting the failure of equipment, the failure of machines, no, that's not going to happen. We have preventative maintenance. No, really, that piece of equipment over there is going to fail on Thursday next week with an 80% likelihood. No, it's not going to happen. And this frustrated me. I didn't understand why people wouldn't want to be more rational in their decision making. Here we are, we've got information about the future. Now, I started my career a long time ago, and we had historical information. We had printouts, computers were giving us information about what had happened. And this millennium, we started to get dashboards about what's happening right now in our business. And so we can pull the levers right now and get immediate type responses in our business. What we've got now with machine learning and predictive analytics is information about the future. And what I identified was that people didn't know how to handle that. This is a whole new time horizon of information, a time horizon for decision making. And I started thinking, look, will this make people more rational in their decision making? But this reaction said no. So then I realized I didn't know enough about how people make decisions. So I started researching that. I asked Dr. Google. Dr. Google told me that there's all sorts of decision models. People have been making decisions. Aristotle started talking about it 2,000 years ago. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of research in here. Maybe there's a PhD in here somewhere as well. But what I found, I came across an article that had, there are decision styles. There are ways that people go about making decisions. And then I started finding, well, we have a lot of information and a lot of models about how people make decisions personally and the general public. But I was dealing with business people. Are they making decisions for themselves, or are they making decisions for the business? And I didn't understand this. I'd had a long career. I was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was a senior vice president at Computer Sciences Corporation. So I'd seen lots of decisions being made. I was at the board table. I was at the senior executive. And yet I didn't know how other people made decisions. I knew how I made them, but not other people. So I started researching that. The thing that got me, though, was that as we were doing our IoT projects, what was the business benefit of knowing that that equipment was going to fail next week? And those of you who were in Sydney about 6, 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, know that there was a tragic accident. On the northern beaches, a truck was going down a hill and its brakes failed. It was a fuel truck, and it hit a number of cars, killed a number of people. The brakes failed. Now, subsequently, it's been found out that they weren't maintaining their trucks well enough. They'd actually been cutting back. It was a VC-backed company. They'd been cutting costs and cutting back on their preventative maintenance. That accident was entirely predictable. That accident was entirely predictable. Let's get the information, let's predict that. So I made connections with the other IBM business partners in the US, and they were doing exactly that. They were predicting that if you took this truck on this route with this load, in this weather next week, it's likely to have an accident, and the percentage likelihood of that. And they were starting to make use of that information inside that trucking business. Now for me, as a small company with half a dozen people, doing banking data and the privacy, IoT was a much better place to be, because nobody really cares about that data. It's not that secret. So we could get lots of it. So we started working on these sorts of things, working for power companies, doing predictive analytics on power generation equipment. So the thing for me was, can I understand how people make decisions in light of the knowledge that something is going to happen? Well, it turned out, as I started the PhD, that actually there are 5 ways of making decisions. Now I'm talking about individual decision making here, not group decisions. How does an individual business person make a decision? What decision styles do they use? What's their personality? Is personality linked to the decision style? If you're a more senior manager in an organization, are you more intuitive or are you more rational than more junior managers? And does it matter? Now, on the scale of intuitive and rational decision making, who here is at the rational end of decision making? So I can assume then that everybody else is at the intuition end. Is that right? Well, it turns out that it's not a continuum. It's not an either or. They're actually orthogonal. You can be both. You can be both intuitive and rational at the same time. But there are 3 other decision styles as well. So the literature was telling me, as I was doing my literature search for the PhD, is dependent, spontaneous, and avoidant. Now, to explain what those are, we think we know what rational and intuitive are, but what about dependent? You can see all 5 of these decision styles when you go to a restaurant with a group of people. The person who goes through every single thing on the menu, looks at the prices, what's in it, is that vegan, no, it's got nuts, etc., etc. No, that's too expensive. So that's the rational decision making. The intuitive, I feel like spaghetti tonight. I'm at a seafood restaurant, but I want spaghetti. Okay, so I get spaghetti. Dependent. How would that be characterized? What are you having here? What are you having? Spontaneous? Yeah, just that one. Okay. Shoot from the hip type of, that type of thing. And avoidant. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to choose. What do you think I should have? So people avoid making decisions. Interestingly, in business, this decision style isn't particularly prevalent at senior management level. Avoiding decisions is not what you're employed to do in a business, right? So you can see all of these decision styles in humans. The thing is, which is your predominant decision style? How do you act at work? When you're making an important decision at work, which is your dominant decision style? So, I managed to convince the University of Notre Dame here in Australia to let me pursue a PhD. They'd seen people my age, somewhat senior years, start these things and never finish them, so they were a little bit sceptical, but they let me try, and that was great. So they said, well, what is it you're going to do? So I got on LinkedIn and I surveyed people that I was connected with on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I'm connected with a lot of board members and CEOs and CFOs, direct reports to the CEOs, and I sent them, if they connected with me, I sent them surveys. There's 118 questions in the survey, so it took quite a while to respond to. Of 2,500 initiated responses, 837 were completed. So I had quite a strong data set here. 837 responses. I had 30% of those were female. That was a pretty good response rate. I was very pleased with that. And 52% of the respondents were board members, CEOs, or direct reports to the CEO. This is a high-value data set for the university. This is one of the reasons why much of the decision science literature isn't about business people. Many of the academics are surveying their students, or they're surveying a cohort which is easily accessible. So this is actually a very high value data set, and it's still there and can still be further research be done. However, I didn't limit it to just Australia. I started out with just Australian, and the title of the PhD was going to be Australian Decision Making, but I also got some American, Canadian, Indian, and other. And you'll see there's some cultural differences here. So one of my supervisors was very keen to see are there cultural differences in the way that people make decisions in business. So I've just explained to you that rational and intuitive is orthogonal. You can be both. So what does it look like? Now I'm sorry for the small font on here, but across the bottom we've got the intuitive score, and up the vertical axis we've got the rational decision-making score. This is a score out of 5. And you can see there's no negative correlation. You can't be one or the other. There's not a lot really saying if you're high in one, you're high in the other. There's not a lot really to see here. But what we're seeing here is, here's the board member scores, here's the general manager and CFO, director and profit center owners, the CEO, second level manager scores. And here's the team leader, supervisor, individual contributor and first level manager. So on first pass, this isn't giving me a lot to go on. My PhD wasn't looking so hot at this point. Fortunately, about this time, I got an invitation to go to Berlin and study at the Max Planck Institute. My second supervisor was a Johns Hopkins University professor who was doing a sabbatical over there. So for the last 2 years, I spent it in Berlin working at the Max Planck Institute. Now, they really tested my knowledge here. They really drove me. And if anybody is doing this sort of thing, get with a group of like-minded researchers. And you'll probably hear that later on today too. Because they spur you on to greater and greater heights in terms of your analysis and your thinking and the critical thinking about decision making. So the next piece of information that came out, who here is familiar with box plots? Who is not? Good. I don't need to explain box plots. If you were putting your hand up there, ask one who put their hand up first what a box plot is. But here we are, we've got female on the left and male on the right. And we've got rational score on the left and intuitive score on the right from this survey. So guess what? Female business executives are more intuitive than male business executives. Phew, I'm glad I got that right round the right way. So the data is telling us stuff perhaps that we already intuitively knew. But it's quite a significant difference here, isn't it? One of the 16 hypotheses that ended up in the final PhD document was that senior executives are more intuitive than junior executives. There was a hypothesis, there was supporting evidence in some of the literature that said that would probably be an appropriate level. And as you've seen, I've got categorization of the respondents by their most senior level in organizations. Why would you think they'd be more intuitive at a senior level than at a more junior level? Experience. They've got more experience to rely on. Anything else? Confidence. Lack of time. Yeah.
And the fact they got to the position, kind of selection.
And the fact that they got to the position, it's sort of natural selection. You've got to be good at intuitive decision making at more senior level. Well, the arguments were organizational design, and it was really that if you delegated all of the decisions down to the lower level of the organization with rules-based, with factual and rational decision making bases, the only ones that are going to get escalated up are the ones without time. You don't have time to do the full-blown analysis, or ones where you don't have the data, so you've got to make an intuitive decision. And in a hyper-competitive environment, that's where it would all go. So you'd think that people at more senior level, the age one was an interesting one actually. So does that mean that older people are more intuitive than younger people? Because Younger people haven't got the experience. It's not proven. Actually, it's inconclusive. The data didn't show that that hypothesis was supported with the data. So young people can be intuitive, and old people can be intuitive. It's got nothing to do with age. Excuse me. But senior executives are actually more rational than junior executives. I'm sorry again for the level here. So on the left we've got the rational score, on the right we've got the intuitive score. You can see the CEO in this one here, direct reports to the CFO, first level manager and individual contributor on the rational score. CFO and direct report, and first level manager and individual contributor. You can see there's a significant difference borne out by the statistic as well. And then the intuitive score, well, it's pretty well lined up. So that hypothesis was not proven. In fact, more senior executives are more rational than more junior executives. Now this gives us an insight as to why there is a data revolution, why we're pushing to have more machine learning, predictive analytics in middle management. Because middle management is making decisions more intuitively, more heuristically. That's not going to happen type of responses. I've been in this job for 20 years and I don't believe that's going to happen on Thursday next week. We've got preventative maintenance. So this gives us some facts and some data around some of the reasons why we're pushing into these sorts of things. So we are actually giving, with machine learning and predictive analytics, more rational decision making, not to the senior executives, but to the middle executives. Reasons for making decisions in a certain way. But how are they making decisions at the moment? So there's these things called heuristics. Has anybody heard of heuristics? Yep, so they're rules of thumb. They're shortcut ways to being able to make a decision, the 80-20 rule. There are many other types of heuristics. The recency heuristic. So we kind of, as human beings, tend to remember the most recent thing, and it's hard to go back into our memory to pull things out from further back. There's a hiatus heuristic in retail. So if a customer hasn't bought from you in the last 9 months, then you've lost them as a customer in certain industries. So these heuristics, Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize for his loss aversion theory, in 1974, wrote a paper with Amos Tversky about heuristics and how bad they are because they lead to biases. We as humans, if we use heuristic decision making, it can lead to systematic biases in the way we make decisions. And he said they're bad. We've got to become more rational. Well, there are challenges in that. Who here has bought a car recently? You cannot be rational buying a car in this country. The definition of rational decision making is that you line up all your alternatives, you line up all the features, the pros and cons, you weight those pros and cons, you do the arithmetic sum at the bottom and you say that's the one I'm going to have. Well, by the time you've done that across every single make and model and variant of all the cars that are available in Australia, there'll be a whole new one set that's come out. You don't have the time. You have to be, and Gert Gigerenzer, who's my professor at Max Planck, was saying, you cannot do that. You cannot be rational in your decision making. You have to do it within certain bounds. And so there's this concept of bounded rationality. It's not quite the way I've described it there, but that's kind of the simplest way of looking at it. So actually, I want a four-wheel drive. Okay, so now you've got rid of all of those cars that are not four-wheel drives, and you've now narrowed your search. And we do this. So this is how people make decisions, rational decisions as well, when actually the best value, economic value, might have been a four-wheel drive Hyundai or something like that. But you've ignored that optimum decision because you said, I don't want four-wheel drive, or I do want a four-wheel drive. So if you look at your decision space and you're trying to optimize that, you might find a local maximum, but you've missed out on all these other areas of that decision space where you are not evaluating rationally. However, the interesting thing there, the reason I put that in was because nobody picked up on the fact that the scales were different. I realised it was an eye test. But the engineer in me said, hang on a sec, my software has told me that's between 2 and 5, and this one's between 1 and 5. So I needed to squash it up just to show you that actually, yes, they are different. And there are differences between nationalities. There are some connections as well between business people and non-business people. Business people on a personality scale are typically more conscientious, and this is a global thing for multiple countries. Business people we've got American, Australian, Canadian, and Indian from left to right on that chart. Business people are more conscientious than the general population of their country. There's a very slight correlation between that and rational decision making. There's no correlation or connection with intuitive decision making. But as we know, correlation isn't causation. There's a whole lot more research required there. But we can see that there are significant differences between Australian rational decision making overall and Indian, Canadian, and not so much American. It's not a significant difference with American. So what does this mean? Are there cultural differences? Can I say in this research that Indian people, Indian business people are not as rational as Australian business people? Now, before anybody throws anything at me, this set of data shows that there are differences. A different set of data may show no differences. I can only speak to this data. The thing is, I can't connect culture with individual decision making. This is 837 individuals. Now, culture is a collective attribute. It's like saying, well, this tree in this forest is a typical tree of that forest, but actually it's got choices. Everybody has choices here. So this 837 people, they have differences. You cannot say, well, this is the average Australian business person, or this is the average Indian business person. So we just have to be very careful about how we start to draw conclusions from this sort of data. So, we've talked a little bit about the weighted options, rational decision making. We've talked about non-rational decision making, heuristics, and intuition. So, rational decision making. Can we unmake a rational decision? Can people change their minds? Because they get more information. They make it at a particular point in time, but they've committed resources. The definition of making a decision is that you agree a course of action and commit resources to taking that course of action. Right? But things like heuristics, we talked about recency, we talked about hiatus, anchoring and adjustment. These are some of the heuristics that Kahneman and Tversky identified. So, you know, my jacket is a nice jacket. You know, it could be worth $1,000, but I got it for a discount. It's only $800. Somebody else would say, well, that's only worth $500. I reckon you should have got it for $400. But the anchoring, the expectation is that it was $1,000, and I got a discount off that, so $800 is good value. So these are some of the biases that come in. If we're buying houses, if we're buying cars, somebody sets an expectation of a price, and then we think we're getting a better price because we started there and gone somewhere else, gone to a better price for us. This is the issue, the idea of marginal utility as well. Is an $800 jacket good marginal utility for me? Because actually I don't value the $800, I value the jacket more. So a lot of this research is looking at these sorts of things. The constant angle heuristic is actually an amazing one. It pops up in things like behavioral economics as well. So when we catch a ball, we're using the constant angle heuristic. If the ball is being thrown to us and the ball is going over our head, the angle is changing. So we move backwards until the angle stays the same. If it's falling short, the angle is decreasing. So we move forward until the angle comes back again. And as long as we keep that angle constant, the ball will find us. We don't calculate where the ball is going to fall and then move to that spot. An engineering approach would do that. Well, an engineering approach actually uses this constant angle heuristic. Airline pilots use it. When they landed on the Hudson River, they realized they weren't going to land at JFK because JFK was rising up through the screen, through the front windscreen. So it wasn't a constant angle. They knew they couldn't get there. They had to find somewhere else to land. In sailing, if I'm sailing along and there's another boat sailing, we could be on a collision course. I will know in 5 minutes' time if they're in exactly the same angle as they were 5 minutes ago. We're on a divergent course. So this constant angle heuristic is actually what's now used in the world's most successful air-to-air missile, the Sidewinder missile. So heuristics and intuitive decision-making is actually quite good for humans. We get a very close approximation to an optimal outcome using heuristics. But they have to be environmentally congruent. You wouldn't use the constant angle heuristic for a hiatus type thing, but you have to use them in the situation for which they're designed. But as animals, we've actually come to the point where we are using heuristics and our intuition and coming up with good decisions as well. So where does this leave us? I'd like to give you an example of the anchoring and adjustment heuristic. Can I ask that side of the room? We're using n factorial, which is the name of my company. We're using factorials. So 3 factorial, if you didn't know, is 3 times 2 times 1. So I'd like the right-hand side of the room to calculate the score that we're going to calculate, starting from the top. And I'd like the left-hand side of the room to calculate it in their heads, no calculators, starting from the bottom. Now, you only have 5 seconds to do this. So you won't get to the answer, I expect. But what I'd like to understand is this side of the room, what's it like when you start from the bottom? What is your estimate? And what is your estimate when you start from the top? So the challenge for you, and you have 5 seconds, is estimate 8 factorial. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Stop calculating. Thank you. So the right-hand side of the room, what's your estimate of 8 factorial? Anybody?
8,000.
8,000? Good start.
100,000.
100,000. Okay. 8,000 and 100,000. The left-hand side of the room. 5,000? 8,000? 1,000?
60,000.
10,000? Okay. It's interesting. Most people, when they start from the bottom, when they start from the top, end up with a higher number than the people who start from the bottom.
Yeah.
But the real answer is 40,000. So who was at 100,000? Pretty close. Factorially closer than 1,000 than 4,000. So the interesting thing there is that anchoring and adjustment, you got to a certain point, you said, okay, well, let me take a guess on the rest. Where did I get to? But it was nowhere near the correct answer. So this is what machine learning can do for us, of course. This gets us to the point where we can calculate these things. We've got computers doing it. We can be more accurate. I tend to think that it drives more rational decision making, and it drives it into the middle part of the business where people currently are having to do this. So I'm a firm believer in machine learning. I happen to work for Data Robot now, so I'm a very firm believer in machine learning. But this is beautiful. You know, 8 factorial is the number of ways that you can arrange 8 books on a shelf. You've got 8 books, you can arrange it 40,000 different ways on your shelf. That's a lot of ways, isn't it? That's a lot of decisions to have to make too. So that's all I have for you tonight. So thank you very much.
You haven't explained your cheesecake recipe. Anyway, questions? I'm just wondering what kind of industries you actually got your data from. Was it just one industry or several?
So I didn't collect information on the industry that the individuals were in. 118 questions, there's a lot to ask board members and CEOs and direct reports to CEOs to respond to. So I didn't collect that information, so I can't tell you on the phone.
So how do you know there wasn't any kind of selection effect there?
I don't. It's one of the drawbacks of self-reporting and the sort of collection mechanism that I used. But you're right. I couldn't control for all the different factors. Who's got the... Sorry, there's one over here.
Thank you. I just have one question. So when you were comparing the relatively junior management to the senior management, we found that senior management is more rational. But if we actually follow the journey of their career, wouldn't they become the senior managers at some point? So is there some kind of transformation happening? Or is that the case that rational people become the top management?
Now, if I was to do this same data collection in another 10 years, and with those same people, and saw their progression, maybe I could draw that conclusion, but I'm sorry, I can't draw that conclusion here because there's 2 separate cohorts. Okay, that's statistically not valid. Sorry, but I can't answer that one either.
Yeah, you talked about the 5 different types.
Yes.
2 of them you said were orthogonal. What about the others? Are they all orthogonal?
Yes, you can still have components of your decision-making style of the others. So yes, you do a spider map and you can plot those.
So completely independent?
Yes, they are. Yep, absolutely.
Can you comment on the experiment design process that you were taking to take it into the 118 questions or processes and thinking right behind that?
Okay. It wasn't an experiment, it was survey data.
Yep.
So I wasn't comparing behaviours and I wasn't asking people to conduct tasks and then observing and getting raw data that way. This is self-report measures, and there were 3 instruments that were inside there. The GDMS, which is the majority of the results I've presented tonight. The Generalized Decision-Making Styles Questionnaire. It's been used since 1995. It's got many other peer-reviewed articles, and as have the other 2. So there's a preference for intuition or deliberation, so deliberation being rational decision-making. Slightly different constructs, but that only measured intuitive or rational decision-making. So these were all 3, and so that gave me insights into the individual in a number of different dimensions. I've only presented a few here tonight. So we didn't do any experiments.
Can you explain, maybe in a high level, like how do you differentiate how to measure that this person is rational and intuitive and dependent and so on? Like, what did that mean if someone score 1 or 5 in rational or logical?
Okay.
Yeah.
So for GDMS, there were 5 sets of 5 questions, so 25 questions in that instrument. That some of them were reverse scored, so you didn't get people to, right-hand column all the way through. And these were how do I make important decisions? So by the fact that I'm surveying business people, it's how do business people make important decisions. Now I didn't qualify it as at work, or at home, that this is important decisions. So there was an assumption underlying that that said they use that at work as well, as in their normal life. So I didn't make any of those distinctions. I used the instruments as they were. Now those instruments, there's many papers I can point you to to explain how those attributes, those 5 attributes, were then drawn into them. Okay. Who's got the mic this side?
Great talk.
Thank you.
I've had an experience taking the Myers-Briggs test in the past. So, which basically is a map of the personality in some way that helps the organization make a calculated decision about how to go about the career progression and such.
Yep.
So, how is your decision-making test product in itself going to add a layer of
Complexity to that?
Yeah.
Okay. 2 things. You're right there, MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, is an indicator of personality attributes. It's broader than the Big 5, and it was the Big 5 that I used in this instance. So, neuroticism, openness to experience, and those sorts of things. The issue there is that conscientiousness, from all the literature, was one of the key ones. Now, that's not directly measured in MBTI. However, there are papers that have compared personality attributes and decision styles, both the MBTI and other personality trait tools. So I can point you to those, but I can't make a direct connection. And the other thing is that Myers-Briggs is expensive.
Yeah.
If I was, and it's quite voluminous. Here I was able to get away with only 10 questions.
I thought it was 180 questions.
Of the 118, remember there's 3 other instruments, and then there's what level, what age category are you, gender, country, and 10 questions on personality type. So there was a lot of questions, a lot of data was gathered. So I'm sorry I can't make that connection between MBTI and what's done here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would think that even dependent, that decision making would kind of be avoided amongst the higher levels of business. Like, unless it was, say, a partnership, like it would be, like you'd probably be the one that would make the decision, you know?
It's really interesting, actually. I'm glad you raised that point, because avoidant is where you actually don't want to even engage in the decision-making process. You're avoiding it. You're not procrastinating, you're pushing it away. Dependent is actually, I'll ask you, and I'll ask you, and I'll ask you, and I'll get your opinion, and your opinion, and your opinion. Now, authentic management and some of the management theories say, well, actually, this is how you get engagement in the decision-making process. So, yes, there was a lot of, not enough, a lot, but a number of papers were saying, well, actually, in senior management, perhaps dependent decision-making is not a bad thing. Now, I didn't go there with my thesis. There was just already too much data, already 16 hypotheses to go, but you raise a good point.
Could be rational.
Actually, there's an observation that senior management is only about 4% of all the data in the company, and that's why they have enough data which can be rationalized on, whereas the middle management has about 60% of all the data in the company, and they don't have enough time to process it, and that can explain your results as well.
So for the other people that couldn't hear that, the comment was, well, senior management have got all the data of the company, and more junior managers, A, don't have the time to go collect it and analyse it, and B, don't have all of the data. You could surmise that. There's a PhD in that. But that data isn't available to me to be able to draw that conclusion. So I'm sorry, I'm standing really behind because it is a very interesting area. The literature review was just huge. You can go from Aristotle all the way to modern day, where we've been exploring decision making and how human beings make decisions, and it's very, very large. There's a whole body of expert decision making. So how do experts make decisions? People who are firefighters, they have intuition that building's going to fall down and don't go in. you know, but they've got heuristics, they've got experience. How do they make decisions? And there's a whole body of work done in that space.
Last question.
Last question? Sorry, I'll come back to you later.
Thanks for the talk, Chris. Good job.
Thanks, Tim.
First, a comment. You mentioned that you started your career a long time ago. I don't really think it was that long ago. And second of all, the actual question is, when you're looking at nationalities, did you determine that based on where people lived or where they were born?
I collected both. So this is where I said, where were you born and where do you reside? So managers that are resident in the United States are resident in the United States there. It was quite a long time ago we started our careers. And I've had experience not in India, but in those other countries. And the business cultures are quite different. It's interesting how it sort of comes to Australia over time as well. But the thing is that if you're surviving in a business world and you're of that level of management, you're surviving in the American business environment. So there were quite some discussions between me and my supervisors about which of those attributes will we use. If you were born in India but working in the US, are you US management or are you Indian management? And I figured, no, it's where you're currently working, where you're residing. But we could do it the other way, and I haven't done the analysis, but I could check the other one. Thank you very much for your time. Some wonderful questions.
Hi, I'm Greg Pearl from the Onset Group. I head up the data science and analytic area there. I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. Always fantastic information that we get from that. The Onset Group are the premium technical recruiters across obviously data science, machine learning, NLP, artificial intelligence. I'm here to help organisations build their analytics team and their analytics function with superior talent. There's lots of people out there, really good individuals across a range of different sectors that could be beneficial. And obviously I'm also here for the data science community to assist with understanding the market, understanding what jobs are out there, how to get into data science. So please feel free to reach out. So again, it's Greg Pearl at the Onset Group, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meetup.